Hi YouTube, Canadian Prepper here. It's going to be my first response video, and it's going to be a response to General Lee's video entitled Jericho, the Attack. In this video, I'm pretty sure his main point that he was trying to get across was that, at least in a rural scenario, people would unify and work together, and that the Mad Max type every man for himself scenario is less likely than a people coming together and working together in order to survive type thing. And now I don't want to totally pick apart the video, because I don't think that would be entirely fair. I mean, obviously he made the video on the fly, and but at the same time, I do sort of want to provide him with a full, comprehensive response based on, the thoughts that I've had with respect to that video. Now, like I said, you reintroduced me to the topic, or to the show Jericho, and like I say, when I first started watching it a few years back, I started watching the first episode, and I found myself fast forwarding through all the drama, the filler type, boy meets girl type bullshit. This time around, maybe it's because I'm getting a little older, I don't know, but I've built up more of a tolerance for that kind of thing, so I was able to sit through it and find myself, getting more engaged and interested in the characters' lives and this, that, and what have you. So thanks for, reintroducing it to me. I do find that I'm noticing a lot more things this time, and it certainly does provoke a lot of thought with respect to all the different things that can happen, especially in a small town. One thing I did disagree with respect to the general's idea on that, was this notion that, the Mad Max type scenario is out of the question. And I'm assuming that, his analysis is specifically related to rural societies. I don't know what his thoughts would be on urban societies, but I do think that the outcomes are going to be quite different for a variety of reasons. Namely, in a rural community, there is greater social cohesion, there's greater social solidarity. The mayor in that television show, I believe he was mayor for 25 years. And everybody kind of knows everybody in a small town. There's a common culture that everybody shares, a local culture. And so under those circumstances where everybody kind of knows everybody, it's pretty easy to presume that, yeah, people are going to work together. It's very unlikely that conditions would evolve and that they wouldn't band together to against any sort of perceived threat from the outside. There is a couple things to consider, though, in that show, and I've noticed I'm on episode 19 now, and the whole Mad Max thing, well, it seems to be turning into that. It seems to be, given enough time, things, at least outside of Jericho seems to be holding on, but at least outside of Jericho, things have devolved into chaos, so to speak. Marauders and thieves, excessive rule of law in some areas, complete anarchy in other areas, the breakdown of government type thing. So it appears as though that's what that universe of Jericho is bound for, and this one community within Jericho is resisting that. And of course, because it's Hollywood, they have to they have to maintain some sort of moral, showing. There has to be a good guy and a Hollywood ending. But there are instances in the show where decisions are made, where, there's, like I said, there's marauders, there's Blackwater type people. I'm not going to ruin it, but there's a lot of roving gangs and stuff like that where, outside of that little bubble, that little community, yes, shit's getting worse. So it really only shows the one side of the universe, periodically showing, the bad guys who are coming into that community, and whether or not you think that the Jericho community is even the most just or not, I suppose, is, subjective observation. And there's another point the general made about this idea of patriotism, and I did see that in the show. There was a point in the show where people wanted to know who did this to us, And I think to some extent, patriotism, particularly in the urban environments where nobody knows anybody, where there's a very low proportion of preppers, where there are no farms and, there is no self-sustaining system in place, that patriotism would probably be the only real binding factor that could unify large amounts of people. It unifies people to a point where, so long as people are having their basic needs met, I think that we're under attack, we need to come together, that whole patriotic type thing, the same thing they used after 9/11. I'm not going to get into all the politics and the inside job stuff and all this, although there is some of that stuff in Jericho also. But it will unify people to the point where their needs are met. But once people's core needs stop being met, that patriotic social glue is not going to hold people together for too long. And I'm quite certain that within the cities which the attacks took place, and perhaps even in the larger, urban areas that weren't nuked, I'm sure there was a lot of chaos. And there was a point in the show where a band of refugees had come into the town, and they basically said, like, you don't know what we've seen. We've seen horrible things. And, I'm assuming, and they talked about how, how hard it was to survive on the road and stuff like that. So outside of that bubble, I think, yes, it's going to be fine. But, how many amongst us can really boast living in a community like that? So I think it's unrealistic to presume that, the majority of people are going to fare as well as they did in Jericho. And even towards the 19th episode now, they are not faring so well. Another point the general made was in the coordination with local authorities. Now, to some extent, I could see that. I think that for the first part of all this, people are going to, their conditioning to authority is going to be maintained by the presence of people in uniform. But as that social fabric, the delicate social fabric begins to tear, more people are going to start to see the situation for what it is. And I think once that happens, particularly in the cities, maybe whether it's a few days to a month, there's going to be, suits aren't going to be recognized anymore. Especially if people don't think that things are being fairly distributed. It's one thing for the small town sheriff and all his deputies who, the town has known for the last however many years to be the administrators of everything that goes on. But it's another thing altogether for, a bunch of anonymous police officers, probably wearing riot gear or carrying automatic weapons, are going to be trusted by large groups of people in the urban environments who are going to be entirely dependent on aid from outside agencies, just like in Syria. So just because they're de facto authority doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to persist. In some places, yes, they will. They will be the binding factor. And I do think the general makes a great point about, that there's going to be pockets of communities, pockets of unity, which are going to be, holding on to that thing which makes us human, our ability to work together. And maybe that's all that's going to be remembered when the smoke clears is, the Mad Max stuff is going to be forgotten about, or because the only thing that's going to be remembered is those who keep the records, right? And the only people who are going to keep the records are people in communities, people with the institutions in place to do that. So yes, there will be gravitational points where people unify around for various reasons. And the us versus them mentality will work to solidify small communities. They will bond together to, quote unquote, keep people out who aren't like them. But it's really difficult for me to accept this idea that, that they're going to be these moral arbitrators, perfectly ethical, virtuous people. I just don't think that that's going to play out in many instances. I think that, as I've said in my take on this before, that the degree of dependence on technology and the degree to which one resides in an urban environment, when the shift hits the what, to the same degree there will be chaos, because the change or the degradation in living standards is what will determine the amount of chaos within a system. Yes, in the third world, life is just peachy. Well, of course it isn't, but they've adapted to a way of life that doesn't entail a whole lot of rule of law. But when you have a society that's fully adapted to that, and all of a sudden it's pulled from underneath them, there's going to be a lot of panic, and there's going to be a lot of fear. And where there's fear, people start doing irrational things. So, unfortunately, General, I don't see it as optimistically as you do. I do think that in some instances it will play out like that. But I am curious to know what your thoughts are as to how things are playing out within this Jericho universe in the larger urban centers, perhaps the ones that aren't hit. And obviously all we can do is speculate, because it is just a show, it's total fiction, but always interested to hear what you have to think about that. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. I'll post a link to the General's video in the description. Have a nice day. Canadian Prepper out.